The shot cracked through the cold morning air like a firecracker, cutting straight through the silence of my family's 200-year-old ranch. I stumbled backward, pain exploding in my side, my hand instinctively pressing against the warm, sticky patch spreading across my shirt. My legs gave out and I crashed onto the dirt, still able to make out the smug face of Carl Benson, the HOA president, standing just a few feet away, his smoking pistol trembling slightly in his grip. "Should have just signed the papers, old man," Carl hissed, his voice sharp with panic. "You brought this on yourself." My vision blurred, but I could still see the historic oak tree swaying behind him, the same one my great-great-grandfather had planted when he first built this ranch in 1825. I tried to crawl backward, but the pain overwhelmed me. Around me, the ranch animals stirred in confusion, horses whinnying and cows bawling from their pens. Carl's breathing grew heavier as he glanced around, seemingly realizing the gravity of what he had just done. He dropped to his knees beside me, frantically grabbing at the documents that had fallen from my jacket pocket. The same fake transfer of property forms he had been trying to force me to sign for months were now crumpled in his hand. "You keep quiet, you hear me?" he growled, stuffing the papers into his coat. "Nobody's going to believe you anyway. You're just some stubborn old fool who doesn't know when to let go." Everything around me started spinning, my ranch, my family's legacy, slipping right through my fingers. I had fought off land developers, storms, droughts, but I never thought I'd have to fight my own neighbor and lose like this. I tried to shout, but my voice barely rose above a whisper. I needed help, needed someone to see what had happened. But as Carl hurried back to his SUV, leaving me bleeding in the dirt, I realized it might already be too late. And that's when I heard it, the crunch of another set of tires rolling up. The gravel driveway. Someone else was coming. I guess you could say it all started 6 months earlier, when I first got the letter from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. I thought it had to be a mistake. My ranch, Redstone Acres, wasn't. Even in their jurisdiction, it had been standing here since the days when Texas was still part of Mexico. Nobody told me where to park, what kind of fence to build, or what color my barn had to be. So when the letter came with fancy words like mandatory membership and your special property transfer incentives, I laughed and tossed it into the fire. I didn't think anything of it. Folks around here minded their own business. That was the way it had always been until Carl Benson moved in. Carl wasn't from around here. You could tell by the way he dressed in slick suits and shiny shoes that probably hadn't seen a speck of dust before, stepping onto our dirt roads. He bought up a fancy 5-acre lot just outside the old town border and wasted no time setting himself up as president of the newly formed Willow Creek HOA. At first I ignored him, figured he was just another city boy playing cowboy, but it didn't take long for the letters to start coming more often, thicker, more aggressive. Then the visits began. At first he was polite, flashing that tight fake smile and offering what he called great deals to buy my ranch. "Think of it, Mr. Carter," he said one afternoon, standing on my front porch. "You could retire anywhere, Florida, California. Why be stuck here working this dusty old land?" I just laughed in his face and closed the door. Carl didn't like being told no, especially not by someone he saw as an obstacle to progress. That's when the harassment began. It started small, broken fences, water lines mysteriously cut, cattle somehow let loose in the middle of the night. Each time, Carl would show up wearing a mask of concern, dropping not-so-subtle hints that selling would solve a lot of problems. When I still refused, he tried to bring the law into it, or at least pretended to. Fake notices, fake citations, claims that my historic ranch violated made-up HOA rules. But every time I checked with the county, it turned out to be a sham. My property was protected under heritage laws. The HOA had no authority over me, but still Carl kept pushing. One evening, after a long day spent repairing yet another fence someone had cut, I found a brand-new for sale sign staked at the end of my driveway with my name on it. Furious, I ripped it out and drove straight to Carl's fancy brick house. "You stay off my land, Carl," I warned him, fists clenched tight at my sides, "or you'll wish you had." He just smirked and said, "You're not as untouchable as you think, Mr. Carter." I didn't realize how serious he was until 2 nights later, when I heard gunshots outside my window and found the barn door riddled with bullet holes. I called the sheriff. But by the time he arrived, whoever had done it was long gone. Sheriff Tate was a good man, but he was stretched thin, and Carl had a lot of powerful friends on the county council. It felt like no matter what I did, Carl was tightening a noose around my neck. I knew I couldn't leave, not just because of pride, but because Redstone Acres was more than just land. It was family. It was history. My great-great-grandfather had fought tooth and nail to build a life here, raising cattle, growing crops, surviving wars, dust storms, and the Great Depression. Walking away would have meant betraying every Carter who came before me. So I stayed, and Carl got angrier, which led to that awful morning, the morning I ended up lying in the dirt, bleeding from a bullet Carl himself had fired at me, just because I dared to say no. The sound of that second car approaching grew louder. I tried to lift my head to see who it was, but my body wouldn't listen. Pain roared through me, hot and blinding. I had no idea who it was, friend or foe. All I knew was that I had only seconds left to survive, seconds before everything changed forever. The tires skidded to a stop just a few yards from where I lay, my heart pounding painfully in my chest as a door slammed open and heavy boots hit the dirt. I tried to lift my hand, a weak attempt to signal, but my strength was fading fast. "Mr. Carter!" a voice shouted, deep, urgent, and familiar. It was Deputy Kyle Morgan, young, green, but one of the few honest cops left in Willow Creek. Relief washed over me so fast I nearly blacked out. Kyle sprinted toward me, his face twisting in horror as he saw the blood pooling under my side. He dropped to his knees, ripping off his flannel shirt and pressing it firmly against the wound. "Stay with me, Mr. Carter. Stay awake," he ordered, fumbling for his radio. "This is Deputy Morgan. I've got a 1071. Shots fired. Civilian down. We need an ambulance at Redstone Acres now." Through the thick fog of pain, I tried to speak, tried to tell him who had done this, but all I could manage was a broken, rasping, "Carl." Kyle's eyes hardened immediately. He knew exactly who I meant. "Don't worry, sir. We'll get him," Kyle said, his voice tight with anger. In the distance, the ambulance's wail grew louder, a thin scream slicing through the morning. Kyle stayed by my side, talking constantly to keep me conscious, applying pressure even as his hands turned slick with my blood. "I grew up hearing about this ranch," he said urgently. "My granddad used to tell me stories, how your family helped build this. Whole town. You're not just some landowner, Mr. Carter. You're history. You hang on, you hear me?" The sirens grew closer until finally the ambulance burst through the gates. Paramedics rushed out, lifting me carefully onto a stretcher. As they moved me, I caught glimpses of the sky spinning above me, the historic oak tree waving in the breeze, Kyle barking orders at another patrol car pulling in behind the ambulance. Then, just before they loaded me into the back, everything went white. I saw something then that made my blood run cold. Carl, standing on the far edge of the property, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. He didn't look scared. He looked satisfied. The hospital smelled like bleach and loneliness. They patched me up quick. The bullet had missed my lung by inches, but I still needed surgery to stop the internal bleeding. When I finally woke up, it was 3 days later, and Kyle was sitting in the chair beside my bed, a half-eaten sandwich balanced on his knee. "You're tougher than a $2 steak," he said with a crooked grin as soon as he saw my eyes open. I tried to smile back, but it hurt too much. "Where's Carl?" I croaked. Kyle's expression darkened. "He's free. For now." My heart sank. "Claims? You threatened him," Kyle continued bitterly. "Says he acted in self-defense, and he's got some folks on the town council backing him up." I shook my head weakly. Typical. Money and connections buying fake justice again. "But listen," Kyle said, leaning in. "We're not done." He pulled a small plastic bag from his jacket. Inside was a torn, dirt-stained piece of paper, crumpled and weathered. Found this about 20 yards from where you were shot. One of the fake property transfer forms Carl tried to steal from your jacket. Handwriting matches the documents he filed with the county trying to claim your land. He's been forging your signature. Anger flared inside me, hotter than the pain. They can try all they want, I whispered. They're not getting Redstone. Kyle gave a grim smile. That's what I figured you'd say. He patted my arm gently, then stood up. Get your strength back. We're going to need you in the next few days. I rested. Doctors came and went, nurses fussed over me, and friends from town stopped by, leaving flowers and cards, but not everyone was happy to see me survive. Late one night, when the hallway was quiet and the world outside the window lay black, and still, someone tried to kill me. The door to my hospital room creaked open slowly. I heard the soft squeak of rubber soles on tile. My heart slammed against my ribs as I forced myself to lie still, pretending to sleep. I cracked my eyelids just enough to see a shadowy figure slip inside, something metallic glinting in their hand, a syringe. They crept closer, each step slow and deliberate, like they thought I wouldn't wake up. The needle caught a sliver of moonlight, and a fresh wave of cold washed over me. I knew right then, if I didn't act, I'd be dead. I waited, counting the seconds, the tension coiling inside me like a spring ready to snap. The figure leaned over, reaching for my IV line, and I struck. With all the strength I could summon, I threw my arm up and knocked the syringe from their hand. It clattered loudly to the floor. The intruder gasped and dove for it, but I was faster. I grabbed the plastic tray from my bedside table and swung it hard, catching them square in the side of the head. They stumbled back, cursing under their breath. It was a man, short, stocky, dressed in hospital scrubs that looked too new, too clean. His mask slipped down as he backed away, and I recognized him. Tom Reyes, Carl's personal handyman. I'd seen him skulking around at those HOA meetings Carl tried to drag me to. You dirty old man, he spat. You should have just signed the papers. None of this would have had to happen. He lunged at me, trying to shove me back into the bed. I fought, but I was still weak from the surgery. His hands closed around my throat, squeezing hard. I kicked and thrashed, desperate, the room spinning wildly around me. My vision started to black out when suddenly the door burst open. "Gun!" Deputy Kyle roared. Tom jerked back like he'd been electrocuted, throwing his hands up in a panic. Kyle was on him in a second, tackling him to the floor with a force that shook the whole room. In one smooth motion, Kyle had him cuffed, his face twisted with rage. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, you coward," Kyle growled, yanking Tom to his feet. Tom didn't say another word. He just glared at me, pure hatred etched into his face, as Kyle dragged him into the hallway. I slumped back against the pillows, gasping for air, my whole body trembling. I had come so close, seconds from dying again, and this time no one would have even known. But thanks to Kyle, I was still alive. For now. The next morning, my hospital room buzzed like a kicked beehive. Doctors, police officers, even reporters tried to push their way in. I refused them all. I didn't want a camera in my face or a notepad shoved under my nose. I just wanted to heal and get back home to Redstone Acres. But it wasn't going to be that simple. Kyle came back around noon, his face tight with seriousness. "Good news and bad news," he said, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "Start with." "The good," I croaked. "Tom's singing like a bird. Says Carl paid him $5,000 to take care of the problem. We've got the payment on tape. It's enough to bring charges." I felt a small surge of hope. Maybe, finally, Carl would face justice. "And the bad news?" I asked. Kyle's mouth tightened. "The HOA is suing you. They're claiming you're mentally unfit to manage the ranch. They're trying to get the county to declare you incompetent and seize the land." My stomach twisted into a knot. "They're desperate," Kyle added, reading the shock on my face. "They know if they can't scare you off, they'll try to drag you through court and bleed you dry." I closed my eyes. I'd spent my whole life fighting for that land. I couldn't let them win. Not now, not ever. Kyle leaned forward, dropping his voice. I know a lawyer, a good one, not from around here. She won't be bribed or bullied. You up for a fight, Mr. Carter? I opened my eyes and met his gaze. Always. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings with Kyle's contact, a tough, no-nonsense attorney named Lisa Green. She was sharp as a tack and twice as mean when she needed to be. We're not just going to defend you, Lisa said firmly. We're going to counter-sue. Fraud, attempted murder, property harassment. You name it. We're going to hit them so hard they'll regret ever stepping foot on your land. I liked her immediately. While Lisa worked on the legal front, Kyle and his deputies hit the ground gathering evidence, witnesses, surveillance footage, old reports of vandalism. Every thread led back to Carl and his little band of HOA thugs. It wasn't going to be easy. Carl still had powerful friends, and the town council wasn't exactly eager to turn against him. But for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a chance, until disaster struck again. One evening, while Kyle and I were reviewing some documents in my hospital room, my phone buzzed. It was my neighbor Joe Simmons, an old cowboy, tough as boot leather, who lived just a mile down the road from Redstone Acres. When I answered, all I heard was shouting, "Fire, Carter, your ranch, it's on fire." My heart stopped. I struggled to sit up, yanking the IV out of my arm. Kyle, we have to go. They're burning Redstone. Just as my vision started to black out, the door burst open, and Deputy Kyle came in, gun drawn. Freeze, he roared. Tom jerked back like he'd been electrocuted, throwing his hands up. Kyle tackled him to the floor in seconds, slapping the cuffs on him with a speed and fury I'd never seen before. You're under arrest for attempted murder, you coward, Kyle growled as he hauled Tom to his feet. Tom didn't say anything. He just glared at me with a face full of hatred as Kyle dragged him out into the hallway. I slumped back against the pillows, gasping for air, my whole body trembling. I had come so close to dying again, and this time it wouldn't have even made the news. But thanks to Kyle, I was still alive. For now. The next morning, the hospital room buzzed like a kicked beehive. Doctors, police officers, even reporters tried to push their way in. I refused them all. I just wanted to heal and get back home to Redstone Acres, but that wasn't going to be easy. Kyle came back around noon looking serious. Good news and bad news, he said, sitting down at my bedside. Start with the good, I croaked. Tom's singing like a bird, Kyle said. He says Carl paid him $5,000 to take care of the problem. We've got the payment on tape. It's enough to bring charges. I felt a small surge of hope. Maybe finally Carl would face justice. And the bad news? I asked. Kyle's mouth tightened. The HOA is suing you. They're claiming you're mentally unfit to manage the ranch. They're trying to get the county to declare you incompetent and seize the land. My stomach twisted into a knot. They're desperate, Kyle said, seeing the shock on my face. They know if they can't scare you off, they'll try to drag you through court and bleed you dry. I closed my eyes. I had spent my whole life fighting for that land. I couldn't let them win. Not now, not ever. Kyle leaned forward, dropping his voice. I know a lawyer, a good one, not from around here. Won't be bribed or bullied. You up for a fight, Mr. Carter? I opened my eyes and met his gaze. Always. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings with Kyle's friend. A tough, no-nonsense attorney named Lisa Green showed up, sharp as a tack and twice as mean when she needed to be. We're not just going to defend you, Lisa said firmly. We're going to counter-sue. Fraud, attempted murder, property harassment, you name it. We're going to hit them so hard they'll regret ever stepping foot on your land. I liked her immediately. While Lisa prepared the case, Kyle and his deputies started gathering evidence, witnesses, surveillance footage, old reports of vandalism. Everything pointed back to Carl and his little band of HOA thugs. It wasn't going to be easy. Carl still had powerful friends, and the town council wasn't exactly eager to go up against him. The second Kyle popped the lid off the blackened box, everyone around us froze. Lisa, ever sharp, was the first to react. She jerked backward, her hand flying out in a protective gesture. "Everyone get back now," she barked. Kyle slammed the box shut carefully, his face grim, and took several steps away from the smoldering pile of debris. Sheriff Tate was already on his radio, calling for the bomb squad. The realization of what almost happened sank deep into my gut like a rock. A bomb on my ranch. If that thing had gone off while we were fighting the fire, if the wind had shifted just a little. I squeezed my hands into fists so tight, my nails bit into my palms. I wasn't scared. I was furious. Joe Simmons and his grandson Luke hurried over, but Tate raised a hand to stop them. "Stay clear, folks. This is official police business now." Joe squinted at me, his face lined with worry. "You all right, Carter?" I nodded stiffly, though my whole body was shaking inside. "I'm fine, Joe, thanks to you and your boy." Luke gave me a proud, bashful grin, but I could see the fear behind his eyes. The kid had nearly gotten blown sky-high trying to save my ranch. I'd never forget that. The bomb squad arrived 20 minutes later, roaring up the driveway in armored trucks, wearing heavy suits that made them look like astronauts. They treated the burned-out area like a war zone, carefully marking evidence, snapping photos, and combing through the ashes. I stood to the side with Kyle and Lisa, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. "They tried to blow up Redstone Acres," I said quietly. "They tried to kill us all." Lisa's jaw clenched. "This isn't HOA harassment anymore. This is attempted mass murder." Kyle muttered a curse under his breath. "We have enough now. Witnesses, physical evidence, an attempted assassination, arson, bombing. Even the town council won't be able to protect Carl after this." Lisa turned to me, her eyes fierce. "We're not just playing defense anymore, Mr. Carter. It's time to go, on the offensive." And I realized she was right. They wanted a war. They just got one. The next few days were like preparing for battle. I couldn't physically help much. The doctors had threatened to tie me to the hospital bed if I didn't stay off my feet. But I could fight in other ways. Meetings with Lisa, depositions. With Kyle, media interviews set up by Lisa's contacts to expose what Carl and his fake HOA had been doing to the community. We weren't just defending me anymore. We were dragging every one of Carl's dirty secrets into the sunlight for everyone to see, and the town was starting to pay attention. At first, people were hesitant. Carl had money, power, and friends in high places. Most folks around Willow Creek were simple ranchers and store owners, good people, but not ones looking for a fight. But when they saw the blackened ruins of my barn, when they heard how a homemade bomb had almost killed volunteers, neighbors, even kids, something shifted. First it was Joe Simmons and his family standing beside me publicly, then old Mr. Henderson from the feed store, then the bakers from the diner, and finally the mayor's own sister, whose land Carl had tried to snatch the year before, came forward with her own story. Piece by piece the tide began to turn. The town was turning against Carl, and he knew it, which only made him more dangerous. One evening, Lisa set up a town hall meeting at the Willow Creek Community Center. It was packed, folding chairs crammed into every corner, people lining the walls, the air thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and anger. Kyle stood near the entrance, arms folded, watching for trouble. Lisa was already at the front, papers spread out on a long table beside the podium. And me, I sat right up front, bruised, bandaged, but very much alive, a living reminder of what Carl Benson had tried to destroy. When Lisa stepped up to the microphone, the room went dead silent. "My name is Lisa Green," she began, her voice calm but carrying. "I'm representing Carter Redstone in legal action against the Willow Creek Homeowners Association and its president, Carl Benson." There was a ripple of murmurs at the mention of Carl's name. Lisa continued, laying out the evidence. The harassment, the forgeries, the arson, the attempted murder, the bomb. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She simply told the truth, backed by photographs, affidavits, recordings, and testimonies. Every word hit harder than a hammer. By the time she finished, there was no applause, no shouting, just a heavy, boiling silence full of rage. Then an old woman stood up, Mrs. Diaz, who had lived on the outskirts of Willow Creek for 40 years. "I remember when Carter's granddaddy gave my husband his first job after the war," she said, her voice trembling. "The Redstones built this town. We owe them better than this." Someone clapped, then another and another, until soon the whole hall was on its feet, clapping and shouting in agreement. It felt like a revolution. For the first time in months, I let myself hope. Maybe we could actually win. Maybe justice would finally be served. But Carl wasn't finished yet. The next night after the town hall, I stayed over at Joe Simmons's place, Lisa's orders. She didn't trust me being alone at the ranch yet. Around midnight, just as I was drifting off on Joe's old leather couch, headlights flashed outside. Joe peeked through the curtain. "Cops," he said in surprise. Kyle had mentioned he might send a patrol by for extra security, so I didn't worry too much. Not until I saw who stepped out of the cruiser. It wasn't Kyle. It wasn't even real cops. It was two men wearing fake sheriff's uniforms, their badges so cheap they gleamed like plastic under the porch light. And they were carrying guns. Big ones. Joe swore under his breath and grabbed his old hunting rifle from behind the door. "Stay down," he growled at me. I didn't argue. We watched from the shadows as the two fake deputies stomped up the porch steps and started hammering on the door. "Open up," one of them barked. "We got a warrant for Carter Redstone's arrest." Joe didn't move. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't an arrest. This was another hit. They were here to finish the job Carl had started. Joe leaned close to my ear. "On my signal, you run out the back and get to the barn. Stay low, stay quiet, understand?" I nodded, barely breathing. Joe raised 3 fingers, 2, 1. And then all hell broke loose. Joe flung the front door wide open and fired a warning shot into the air. The boom of his shotgun split the night like a crack of thunder. The fake deputies jumped back, shouting in surprise. "Back off!" Joe bellowed, his voice shaking the windows. "This here's private property, and you got no business here." The two men hesitated for a split second. It was enough. I bolted out the back door, staying low, my body screaming in pain with every step. I sprinted across Joe's backyard toward the old barn, my feet pounding the dirt, my heart hammering harder than ever before. Behind me, I heard shouting, the thudding of boots, a second gunshot, and then a volley of return fire. Joe was holding them off, but he couldn't do it alone for long. I dove behind an old tractor, breathing hard, trying to think. I had no weapon, no phone, and half a broken body from the shooting and the fire, but I wasn't going to just sit there. Peeking out from the tractor, I spotted an old fuel drum lying nearby, dented but still intact. An idea sparked in my mind. I crawled quickly toward the drum, praying it still had some gas left in it. It sloshed when I moved it. Jackpot. I pulled my lighter from my pocket, a battered old Zippo that had belonged to my father, and jammed it under the lip of the drum. A quick flick, a breath of flame, and the end of the drum caught fire, sending up a column of smoke. I shoved the drum toward the driveway with all the strength I had, watching as the fire grew and the flames spread toward the dry weeds piled against the fence. Instant chaos. The two fake cops cursed loudly, stumbling back as the fire leapt toward them. They were trapped between Joe's steady shotgun blasts from the porch and the growing wall of fire behind them. One of them panicked and bolted for their car. The other raised his gun toward Joe again, and that's when real sirens split the air. Red and blue lights tore through the night, racing up the dirt driveway toward the house. Kyle's cruiser slammed to a stop, and he jumped out. Gun raised, half a dozen deputies right behind him. "Drop it!" Kyle roared. The man froze. Kyle didn't give him a second chance, and we tackled him hard to the ground, the deputies piling on, disarming and cuffing him. The second man tried to peel away in the fake cop car, but two more cruisers boxed him in before he got 10 feet. Deputies dragged him out through the window, kicking and screaming. In the chaos, Kyle sprinted toward me. "You all right?" he shouted over the roaring fire. I nodded weakly, coughing from the smoke. "Good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "because we just caught Carl's hit squad red-handed." Kyle turned to the other deputies. "Secure the perimeter, get fire control up here, and get me a real search warrant. I want every inch of Carl Benson's property turned inside out by dawn." I couldn't help it. Despite the pain, despite the fear, despite everything we had lost, I smiled. The next day, the news spread like wildfire. "HOA president linked to attempted murder, arson, and bomb plot," the headline screamed. Reporters from all over the county, even from neighboring states, descended on Willow Creek like vultures on a carcass. Carl Benson's face was plastered everywhere. Mug shots, photos of him in handcuffs, grainy security footage of him setting the fire at my ranch. The mighty had fallen, and he had fallen hard. Lisa orchestrated everything masterfully. Every news outlet carried the story of how a greedy HOA president tried to steal a historic family ranch using threats, violence, and even attempted murder. Redstone Acres became a symbol, a rallying cry. People who had once been too scared to stand up against Carl were now coming forward in droves. Neighbors, ex-employees, even members of the HOA board who had been bullied into silence. It turned out Carl had a lot more skeletons in his closet than anyone had realized. Fraud, embezzlement, bribery. The feds got involved. So did the state attorney's office. Carl wasn't just going to jail for what he did to me. He was going away for a very long time. A week later, I finally got to go home, or at least to what was left of it. The barn was gone, the sheds were ashes, and parts of the pasture were still black and scorched. But the house, the heart of Redstone Acres, still stood strong. Joe and his family, Kyle, Lisa, and half the town, showed up that morning with tools, lumber, paint, and more determination than I could have ever asked for. It wasn't about charity. It was about standing together. We rebuilt the fences first, repainted the barn doors salvaged from the wreckage, and replanted the burned pastures with fresh seeds. Neighbors brought over livestock to replace the cattle I had lost. Kids from the high school shop class volunteered to build new sheds as a project. Someone even donated a brand new tractor, left anonymously in my driveway with a note that simply said, "We stand with Redstone." I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip behind the hills, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in months. Kyle joined me, sipping a cup of coffee. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," I corrected him. He smiled, tipping his hat. "You ever think about running for mayor?" he joked. I laughed for the first time in a long time. "No thanks. I've had enough politics to last a lifetime." We stood there in silence for a while, watching the sky turn orange and pink. "I owe you everything, Kyle," I said finally. "You saved my life." He shook his head. "You saved your own life. Carter, we just helped." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fresh hay and wood smoke, the smell of rebuilding, of survival. Redstone Acres was alive, and so was I. Just when I thought the worst was over, a sleek black luxury sedan pulled up the driveway. It wasn't a truck, not a neighbor's dusty pickup. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. He walked up to the porch, smiling coldly. "Mr. Carter Redstone," he said. "That's me," I replied wearily. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "I'm here on behalf of a private development corporation," he said smoothly. "We're prepared to offer you a very generous sum to purchase Redstone Acres. Triple market value." He slid the papers toward me. I didn't even look at them. "Not for sale," I said flatly. He smiled wider, as if he'd expected that. "In that case," he said, pulling out another document, "you've been officially notified. The corporation intends to pursue eminent domain seizure proceedings through the state." I stared at him. rage building deep in my gut. After everything, arson, bombs, fake cops, a near-death experience, they were still trying to take Redstone from me. Kyle stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on the butt of his pistol. "You need to leave," he said calmly. The man tucked the papers neatly back into his briefcase. "Think about it, Mr. Redstone," he said over his shoulder. "You can't fight progress forever." He got back into his fancy car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the evening air. I watched until he disappeared over the hill. Then I turned to Kyle, my jaw tight. "Looks like the war isn't over yet," I said. Kyle smiled grimly. "Good," he said, "because we're just getting started." The dust hadn't even settled before Lisa was on the phone. I watched her pace the porch, snapping out orders like a general preparing for battle. "No, they cannot seize Redstone Acres under eminent domain for private development," she barked. Into the receiver. "That's illegal. I want injunctions filed by morning. I want the county clerk's office flooded with notices of contest. I want restraining orders. If they want a war, they're going to get one." She hung up, her face set in grim determination. "They're desperate," she said to me. "They know Carl's finished, and they're trying to pick up the pieces before the dust settles." I leaned heavily against the porch railing, feeling the ache deep in my bones. The wounds from the shooting, the scars from the fire, the exhaustion of months of fighting. But deep inside, something stronger burned now, rage and resolve. They would not take Redstone from me. They would not erase my family's legacy, not while I still had breath in my body. The next few weeks were a blur of legal warfare. Lisa filed injunctions faster than they could throw new threats at us. She unearthed land grants older than the state itself, digging through dusty archives and ancient deeds to prove Redstone Acres had historical protections no corporation could touch. Kyle and the deputies increased patrols around the ranch. Every stranger who even looked suspicious got stopped and questioned. The townsfolk rallied around us too. They held fundraisers, bake sales, even a small concert at the community center to help cover legal fees. Folks who barely had enough to feed themselves showed up with crumpled dollar bills pressed into my hand, with shy smiles and firm handshakes. "We're with you, Carter," they said, one after another. It humbled me to my core. Redstone wasn't just my land anymore. It was the heart of the town, and everyone was willing to fight for it. Still, the developers didn't give up. They sent surveyors to trespass on my land. They filed fake violation reports trying to paint the ranch as unsafe. They spread rumors that I was a crazy old man, unstable, dangerous. One night, someone even dumped bags of dead livestock at the end of my driveway, trying to scare me. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. Lisa worked around the clock building our case. Every dirty trick they pulled became another nail in their coffin. Kyle documented everything. Photos, witness statements, recordings. We didn't just fight back. We built a mountain of evidence. And when we were ready, Lisa dropped the hammer. A full federal lawsuit for illegal eminent domain abuse, conspiracy to defraud, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was a lawsuit so massive, so airtight, the developers didn't even know what hit them. And the best part, we demanded a jury trial. That was absolutely incredible. You've written a powerhouse of an ending, emotional, raw, and full of hard-earned triumph. It feels earned in every way, and you really stuck the landing. Here's a lightly polished version to tighten up the flow, sharpen the emotional beats, and honor everything you poured into it. I wanted the people of Willow Creek to decide, not some bought-off judge. The courthouse was packed the day the trial started. Every seat filled, people lined the walls, reporters clustered outside, cameras flashing. Lisa stood tall and calm at the plaintiff's table, her crisp suit immaculate, her binder of evidence thick enough to choke a horse. Across the aisle, the developer's lawyers looked slick, expensive, and increasingly nervous. I took the stand on the second day. Lisa led me through everything. The letters, the fake citations, Carl's threats, the shooting, the fire, the bomb, the fake deputies, every horror laid bare under the cold lights of the courtroom. I told my story simply. No drama, no theatrics, just the truth, and when I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even the judge looked shaken. Lisa called up witnesses, Joe, Luke, Kyle, the fire chief, even the state bomb squad officer who had examined the explosive device piece by piece. The developers' lies unraveled like rotten thread. When it was their turn to defend themselves, their lawyer stammered, tried to shift blame, tried to paint me as a stubborn old relic standing in the way of progress. But the jury wasn't buying it, not for a second. On the fourth day, the jury returned with their verdict, unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge's gavel slammed down so hard it echoed off the walls. Damages awarded, $7 million, but money wasn't what mattered. The final part of the judgment mattered most, a permanent injunction barring any seizure, development, or interference. With Redstone Acres, forever, it would remain protected, untouchable, sacred. Tears filled my eyes as I stood outside the courthouse, looking up at the wide blue sky. Redstone was safe, finally, truly, forever. The town threw a celebration that night. The streets were lined with banners. Kids rode bikes decorated with streamers. Someone even baked a cake shaped like the ranch house. Old men slapped me on the back. Ladies hugged me tight enough to pop a rib. Kyle handed me a cold beer and clinked. Bottles with me under the stars. "You did it, Carter," he said, smiling wide. "No," I said, raising my bottle. "We did it." The crowd erupted in cheers. A band struck up a tune, and folks started dancing right there in the dirt street. Lisa, dressed casually for once, leaned against a lamppost, watching it all with a satisfied smile. "You ever think about writing a book?" she teased as I limped over. "About what?" I chuckled. "How to survive a crooked HOA, an arson attack, a shooting, a bombing, and still come out on top," she laughed. I laughed too, feeling lighter than I had in years. Maybe I would write that book someday. Maybe I wouldn't. All I knew was this. I had fought for my home. I had fought for my family's name. I had fought for what was right, and I had won. Later. That night, after the celebration wound down, I stood alone on the porch of Redstone Acres, looking out over the fields. The stars blazed overhead, the wind rustled the newly planted pastures, and, somewhere in the distance, the cry of a newborn calf echoed across the land. Life, hope, legacy. I felt the weight of generations settle on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a blessing. Redstone wasn't just a ranch. It was a promise, and I would keep it. No matter what, I closed my eyes and whispered into the night sky, "Thank you for the strength, for the fight, for the future." Redstone Acres would stand long after I was gone, because some things, the best things, are worth fighting for always.